Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the 007 Files podcast. I'm Bill Koenig. I'll be your host for today. And for this installment, we are going to talk to a established film and TV professional, Robert Short. While he's never worked on a James Bond film directly, he has witnessed some scenes of a James Bond film being made. He and his partner, Danny Biederman, had tried to put together a Man from U.N.C.L.E. theatrical film that would have included Jane Seymour and Ken Adam. He also worked on The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV movie, where George Lazenby was part of the cast, and he lent his Aston Martin DB5 for that production so that Lazenby could drive it, and some other aspects. So we're talking to Robert Short. Bob, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Bob Short, and as Bill said, film professional for more decades than I'd like to acknowledge, and somebody who decided to become a film professional because of being a James Bond and Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan. It was being introduced to really the film world through the Man from U.N.C.L.E. and James Bond, and a little bit of the Universal monsters. Being a monster kid, segueing into being a spy kid, for lack of a better description. It's what led me into the profession that I got into, and because of the monster connection, of course, I ended up creating the monster and James Bond with Q. Kind of led me down a path of creating creatures and gadgets for motion pictures. So it's all tied together.
Bob also shared an Oscar, I should say, for Beetlejuice in 1989. The movie came out in 1988. It was the 1989 Oscars. And also, Bob has a sister who had worked as a kind of combination stunt double extra on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and other things, I assume.
Oh yeah, she was on dozens of shows at that particular time, but she was a regular extra on Man from U.N.C.L.E. for the first 3 years, and appeared regularly in bar scenes in the background, wandering through stuff, doubling for. She never considered herself a stunt woman, but since she was part of like the regular crew, when they needed a stunt double to do a particular shot with Jill Ireland, David McCallum's wife at the time, she'd step in and do miscellaneous stuff. There's a scene in one show where they have to jump off of a cliff onto another cliff. It's like a chasm that they have to jump over. And so my sister, for the extra bucks, jumped in to double Jill as they're running through the Andes and have to jump over the crevice. And she has this story about how there, of course, there wasn't a crevice on the other side. They rigged up some boards for them to jump off of the ledge onto the boards, suspended by a couple of ladders, and how actually tough that sequence was to shoot, even though it looks relatively simple in the show. But she would, she would be a good guy in one episode, and the next episode feeding irradiated food to Ilya Kuryakin trying to kill him. So she was all over the place. Unfortunately, that gained me access to the Man from U.N.C.L.E. set during its first seasons and second and third. So I did open up some doors. And I learned through that kind of how the studios operated. And then friends and I would then skip class and sneak onto the studio lots and hang out on different sets at different studios once we figured out how to like get through security. In those days, it was relatively easy to kind of go in with a crowd of people that were coming in for the day as extras and stuff. And, it was like a little secret mission. And so my friends and I would end up, visiting, visiting shows like we'd spend time over at Man from Uncle, and they were doing combat also at the time. Then we'd go over to CBS and hang out on Wild Wild West and Get Smart, and then we'd go over to Paramount and there'd be I Spy and Star Trek and Mission Impossible. So and then we go to 20th Century Fox and hang out on it was Land of the Giants and Lost in Space, and hang out in the Seaview.
Well,
So we had a great time skipping school and getting kind of learning the ropes being on set.
well, because of, again, this is a James Bond podcast,
Yeah.
let's start with Diamonds Are Forever. You observed at least a couple of scenes, if I remember correctly. Can you describe them?
Well, a friend of mine and I, when I found out that Diamonds Are Forever was going to be shooting in California, especially Vegas, because of the story, a friend and I went out in my Volkswagen and went to Vegas. Couldn't afford a hotel room, so spent 2 days out in Vegas sleeping in the Volkswagen at night, and just kind of tracking down where they were shooting. We found out that the main production office was at the Riviera Hotel, and once we found that out, then we could kind of casually, walk into the production offices and pick up the call sheets for the day, and we picked up a script, and you just kind of go in, grab the stuff like you're working there, and so that led us out to the slumber location. So we were there for the exterior stuff of the slumber.
Slumber Incorporated,
The
I
Slumber
think it was called.
Incorporated with the limo, pulling in, and there was a really small crew, maybe 20. It was just a really skeletal crew. It felt like just maybe 30 people out there, with just a minimal camera setup. Very mobile. Connery spent most of his time sleeping in his chair. He'd get up, and when he wasn't doing scenes, he was like goofing. He's a very gregarious, very casual kind of guy on set. He likes to just talk to people, and he was really fascinated by the patrolmen that were guarding, that were doing traffic control. And there are shots in the publicity stuff, in the publicity stills of Sean Connery on like a police bike. That shows up every once in a while, and it almost looks like official photos of Bond, on a police bike, for some sequence. And the reality is that those were taken on the day that I was out there, because he was just fascinated by the Harley Davidsons. And they allowed him to hop on the Harley to kind of get a feel of it and stuff. And the publicity cameraman who was there at the time was like, "Oh, this is great stuff," you know. So he went over and shot Connery on the bike. And if you look around in Diamonds Are Forever, publicity photos, you'll find these shots here and there, and they weren't official. So that was some of the stuff from Vegas. They were also building the moon buggy at the time out there. So the moon buggy was parked in the back of the hotel, still all gray, still primer gray. And they had they had like a row of like 8 Mustangs all lined up. Interestingly enough, the Mustangs, as we took a look at them, they didn't have their official logos on the side, the little Mach, whatever it is,
Yeah, mock.
Mach
Yeah,
1.
yeah.
And like only 1 or 2 of them, it was just one of those things I happened to notice that 1 or 2 of them had the official Mach 1 logo on the side, and the rest were all like hand painted, uh, brushed, actually hand painted on the side of the car because they weren't, because they didn't have all the logos available to them, I guess.
Were you in the casino when Sean Connery and Lana Wood were doing their thing?
Yeah, it was that was the well, we did 2. We got a chance to go on 2 sets. One was the when Bond first meets Plenty at the crap table, and we were there for the whole day of them shooting that particular sequence. And since my friend and I were there, he appears in his red jacket walking one direction in the scene, and I appear in the background in my blue T-shirt and my wild long hair. At the time, so both he and I were in the scene. He walks through the shot one way, and I walk through the shot the
And
other
this
way.
is
So I
and this is
actually,
behind the 2 actors, to
yeah,
be
yeah.
precise. Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. So it's as Bond is walking, with um, um, Plenty away from the table. I get to walk on camera from right hand side of camera and cross to the left. So I'm actually in Diamonds Are Forever as a fan who was hanging out on the set, going, "I got to be in this is my chance to be in a James Bond film." So, and
Now,
and
we're
they do several takes, and so you just never know
yeah,
whether or not the take you were in is going to end up on the film. And you can imagine how happy I was when I finally saw the film, and I was like,
there you are, yeah. Now, were you
uh,
all
also
go
also
ahead.
went to the also was there for the dinner sequence that was completely cut out over at the Dome restaurant with the mermaid with the harp and the pool and Tiffany and oh, not
Right,
Tiffany,
which
but
shows up as
Penny.
an
Penny,
extra on the home videos,
yeah,
yeah.
which it shows up, and it was interesting to watch that. It was the first time I had ever seen James Bond uncork a bottle of wine and actually turn it back as unacceptable. That's what stuck in my mind, was that watching Bond do the perfunctory, open the wine, swirl it around the glass, and instead of going going, this won't do, and handing it back. And I don't know why that stuck with me, but you just don't see a lot of characters do that.
If
But
if I'm misremembering, please correct me.
yeah,
I vaguely recall you said you were present when there was the famous stunt where, the Mustang goes on 2 wheels, and it
yes,
goes through, the front of the alley, which was filmed at Universal, and
yes,
then the car comes out in Las Vegas, the
right,
magic of film editing. So
right.
were you present when the car went in?
Yeah, I was there on the night where they did the flip up on 2 wheels, and then the other police cars try it and flip up, flip over on their tops. The rest of the time on set, I spent I spent by myself. The exit in Vegas had been shot first,
Right.
and they had it all set up in the alley for the stunt driver to put the car up on the same 2 wheels and drive it through the alley. And the first 4 times that the guy tried it, he couldn't get it to stay up. it would go up the ramp and immediately fall back down. And then they had a conference about the fact that the driver that was there on the day, the driver in Vegas was different than the driver at Universal. But the
Yeah.
driver at Universal had always practiced his two-wheel driving on the other wheels. So he wasn't comfortable with, he didn't have the comfortable skill to put it up on the wheels that they needed to do. So after deliberation, what they decided is, oh, we don't have any alternative. We just got to get this done. They had him flip it up on the two wheels that he was comfortable with, that he could actually maintain the drive, get it up on the wheels and drive through the alleyway. And then they just inserted that flip-flop in the middle because the two different drivers were skilled on two different wheels.
Okay.
So that's why it wasn't that they were the continuity. They didn't follow their continuity. They just ran into a problem, a technical problem.
And they had to fix it in post-production.
Yeah, and they had to fix it. We'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
Now the thing about the alley that is my favorite thing is that when I was talking to the guys there, I was like, why does the alley expand? You've done you're doing a shot with the alley like really thin with like a walkway, and then the set just expanded to this huge alleyway. And if when you watch the film, the alleyway as the car goes into the alley, if you really look at it, it's huge. I mean, it's really big. And they said, well, the thing is that when you flip a car up on its wheels like that, because of the top of the car going one direction and the wheel sticking, the higher wheel sticking out the other way, it widens the car. It makes the car wider than if you kept it on two wheels. If you kept the car regular, you could drive it through something smaller than if you flipped it up on the two wheels, because it widens the actual footprint of the car.
Wow.
So the irony is that flipping the car up on two wheels is the opposite of what you do to get through a small area.
Right.
That's the physics of it.
Yeah.
So
darn physics ruins everything.
It ruins everything. So, I was glad to be, I glad I had a chance to go and do that stuff. And then my biggest thrill was sneaking out to the oil rig, finding out that they had the oil, that they were shooting in Oceanside at an oil rig. And there are no oil rigs off of the coast by San Diego and Oceanside. So they had imported their own oil rig and set it up out there a mile off the coast in the ocean.
Okay.
And I drove down there, and I drove down to Oceanside, and then I checked out the hotels to see if I could spot any production vehicles. And sure enough, it was pretty obvious. There's only one hotel that was like, upscale hotel. So once I did that, then I did my usual walk into the production office, grab the production sheets, check the call sheets. So it was, say hi to all the secretaries and grab a call sheet and learn that. And then as I was looking at the call sheets, I saw that, I wish I had a photo, but I don't. I noticed that Connery and Jill St. John and some guy with gray hair was walking out of the hotel, and they got in a car and drove away. And I hadn't put two and two together that, Charles Gray was Blofeld.
Yeah.
I knew, but I didn't know Charles Gray. I was like, I knew that Charles Gray was playing Blofeld because he's on the call sheet.
Right.
But I put two and two together that the gray-haired guy with Connery was was Blofeld. So the next day, I had seen that, the call sheet was, 7, whatever it was, a 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock call, probably 6 o'clock call for the crew to be down at the marina at a certain berth. So I just went down to the marina and just kind of eyeballed I eyeballed where the crew was going down to this boat. And I remember that I was like, okay, I'll just merge with the crew and get on the boat and see what happens. But they were going down one, and I remember this. I was going down one ramp, and as a shortcut, I went, oh well, I'll just go down the ramp that I'm near. So they're going down the ramp directly to the boat. I'm going down this other ramp, and then I'll just walk along the ramp that's in the water that leads to the boat. So then I start walking toward the boat on the ramp, but it doesn't connect. There's a space of like 3 feet between the one little floating dock I'm on and the floating dock that everybody else is on. So I'm like on the wrong dock. I don't want to call it a dock, but it's like a walkway, floating walkway. But there's 2 of them and they're not connected. They're on one and I'm on the other, which means I have to run all the way. I'm going to have to run all the way back to where I was, back up the ramp, and then run back. And they're almost all loaded, and the boat's almost leaving. And I'm like, okay, I'm in for a pound. I either do this or I don't. And I just ran and jumped over the space between the floating ramps, and just barely made it onto the other ramp. And of course, as I was in midair, my glasses came off. And they hit the water, and I had just barely enough time to like screech to a stop, go back, grab my glasses before they sank. And I figured I'm so in everybody's view now that I'm going to get kicked off the boat. This was so stupid. And so I put my glasses on and I just kind of looked up, and everybody clapped and cheered, and figured that I must be part of the crew. I was late. So everybody clapped and cheered, patted me on the back, and brought me on the boat, and off we went.
Bob, I have to say, I've heard some of these stories. This is a new one on me. So it's like, you are one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. So, but
I just don't know any better. So in any case, got on the boat, got some great shots of the helicopters landing on the oil rig. Then they brought us onto the oil rig using the same basket that they used to bring Bond up from the balloon onto the oil rig. And then I spent as much time as I could out there on the oil rig just before they actually started the attack sequences. And eventually what happened is that the first AD, who knows everybody but everybody on the show, literally like took one look at me when he finally like eyeballed me and went, "You come over here."
Norman Siegel?
I don't remember who was the first day, but he was like, "Yeah, come here." What department are you in?
What are you doing?
What are you doing here? And I says, I'm really sorry. I'm a fan, and I just wanted to come out and watch you guys shoot. And he said, I got to admit, I'm impressed. Everybody was impressed. Nobody got mad or anything. And they just said, listen, we'd love to have you just stay and watch and stuff, but we're doing the battle sequence today. And it's like, our insurance really won't cover you.
For the uninitiated, that sequence included some of the most well-regarded U.S. stuntmen, American stuntmen. Paul Baxley was the stunt arranger for the U.S. sequences. Bob Simmons did the stunt sequences for the U.K. Dick Crockett, he's the guy in the crane that Connery throws out of the crane. And a guy named James W. Gavin renowned stunt pilot was on the crew. I mean, they were all veterans of various U.S. productions. So I'm just tossing that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't recognize I didn't recognize a single one of them. I was just wandering around going, I was just wandering around just going, this is really cool. Hey, look at those Spectre outfits. First time I've seen a black Spectre outfit with a Spectre octopus on it. I wonder if I can get a
Yeah,
hold of one of these belts. You know,
yeah, yeah.
it's like,
Well,
um,
no,
so
go ahead.
oh yeah. So in any case, they did shoot um while I was there, they did shoot the guy walking in the ball, um, and coming to a rest at the bottom of the platform.
Mm.
And they shot that, and when they opened up the ball, the guy everything was just covered in vomit because the guy had gotten so seasick trying to walk in the ball that he literally gotten seasick and thrown up on himself and just cover it was just a complete horrible mess.
Mm.
And and then I got my um and then I got my next thrill from being on Diamonds Are Forever, which was getting in the Huey attack helicopter and flying out and getting some aerial photos of the
Mm.
oil rig and stuff. But I was like, I don't know if I'll ever get. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to be in a Huey attack helicopter again. But it's such a visceral experience.
Well, let's speed forward several
Yeah,
years. So by the
yeah,
late 1970s, you're an established film professional, and you and your partner, Danny Biederman, attempted to launch a theatrical film version of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And I have read Danny years ago provide me a treatment. The first treatment, it's only 17 pages. There were more
yeah,
detailed treatments and scripts later. Um, and the concept was actually the Earth had already been taken over, but it had been taken over economically. Thrush, the villainous organization of the original series, had done this. Um, so you and Danny had put together a package trying to interest the studio. And part of the package included Jane Seymour as one of the female leads and Ken Adam as the production designer. And we'll get into more details, but again, because this is a Bond podcast, I'm going to start off with those two elements. What drew you to seek out Jane Seymour for participation?
you know, it's interesting that we just felt that we felt that we just looked at the script and who we thought would be best for the for the roles, and Danny was the point man a lot on getting the script out to agents and the talent to see what kind of reaction that we'd get. So Danny was much more involved in the actual rounding up the cast and following up with the letters and stuff. And I was just kind of like, yeah, let's try let's try this person, let's try that person. And it basically with Jane Seymour, the material was sent out to her, and her representative said, "Yeah, Jane would be interested." But I think it was just kind of a general kind of like, hey, somebody sends you a script that they're going to be presenting to a studio, and gives your client some gives your client some work. It was yeah, she would love to, she, yeah, it was more or less, my client would like to do this. Let us know how let us know how it proceeds. So
And
it gave
then,
us the ability to include her in the presentation package.
okay, because
And of
she would
course
have
we
been the
had,
quote good girl, or
yeah, she would
go
have been
ahead,
the
Laura
innocent.
Antebellum.
She
Right,
would have been
right.
swept up. Jane Seymour would have been the person swept up in the adventure, who is the innocent, who doesn't know anything about Uncle or Thrush, and by the time that she gets through with the, by the time she gets through with the adventure, it's almost like Alice through the Looking Glass kind of adventure where,
Right.
as in one of the Uncle episodes, she's had this adventure and the door kind of closes behind her. And was it something that really happened or not?
And then the thing that draws my attention, and I've obsessed almost about this ever since I learned of this project, the idea of having Ken Adam being the production designer. What can you tell us about?
Well, Danny again interfaced most of the time with the with people like that, and Ken got back to it. We sent the material over to Ken. We figured, hey, who else to reinvent, Uncle Headquarters and the production design, our idea of what Thrush Headquarters looked like. Then Ken Adam. There really wasn't anybody else that we could, that 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 was a production designer that we felt that, we'd love to have on the show. I mean, it was just one of those things that, oh, let's ask Ken Adam, and the worst he can do is say no. But his response was, he's always loved the Uncle Headquarters and that whole concept. And he was actually very eager to see what he could do as far as reinventing and reimagining the whole Uncle, the look of, Uncle. And so Ken wholeheartedly, said, "Oh, absolutely, I'll do it.
Did,
Just keep me in, just keep me informed."
did Ken Adam provide even the?
No, I wish.
No. Oh man.
He did not. He never put pen to paper. He never did. Here's an idea, guys.
Yeah, yeah.
I wish, but Ken was, no.
He was enthusiastic, but never did anything.
No,
as
he
you
never
said,
did.
pen to paper.
No pen to paper, and that would be something that Danny and I would have treasured forever, framed, and probably made posters of and sold them, kind of thing. But no, we never got any sketch work or anything from Ken.
Okay.
He was just there as part of the package, which we were ecstatic about. And overall, we thought we had a great package, but it was just something that it was so out of bounds. The idea of pitching a TV show as a movie, it was, nobody was wrapping their head around it.
Just for the benefit of listeners who've never heard about this, the package also included Klaus Kinski as the villain, and the idea was to have Robert Vaughn and David McCallum reprise their roles from the TV show.
Yeah, and Vaughn and McCallum were committed to we had commitments from everybody. We had Vaughn committed, McCallum committed, Laura Antonelli committed, Klaus Kinski, Ken Adam, very good friend of mine, Greg Jean, was going to do the miniature work on the show. And we had several directors at different times committed. Arthur Hiller was the final director. We at one point had Boris Sagal, who had directed one of the Uncle feature film, had directed The Prince of Darkness. Boris Sagal was signed on to direct the film for a time. And about a month after Boris Sagal signed on as our director, he walked into a helicopter propeller and was killed.
Boris Sagal is the father of Katie Sagal.
Yeah. So we certainly had our ups and downs regarding the project.
I mean, to me, that's the great, what could have been, it would have been where Uncle and Bond collided, so to speak, had it become reality, but it didn't. So,
and we had several meetings with, we had a lot of meetings with, with the head of development at MGM, and they were percolating on it, and they basically, the TV department derailed it when they decided to go with Michael Sloan's project for the TV movie. And since the TV movie had gotten greenlit, features then got a hold of us and said, "There's nothing we can do with this idea now."
Well, let's go just a few more years later to
Yeah,
that TV movie project, which
right.
was filmed in 1982 and came out in the spring of 1983. Um, you had bought an Aston Martin DB5. I assume that was part of your interest in being a Bond fan.
Absolutely. I've always had a predilection for having cool cars. It's just part of my hobby. And I had previously, the years before getting the Aston Martin, I had built a replica of the Black Beauty from the Green Hornet. And that was my daily driver for a couple of years. And then a friend pointed out that a used Aston Martin was available in Santa Monica on a used car lot. I was like, "How much is it?" He was like, "Oh, it's only 4 grand." I'm like, "Okay, we got to run down there and buy it."
Oh my God,
No, it was
you
only
would
4 grand.
you had it a bargain.
Yeah, it was a
Imagining
bargain.
it
Nobody
today.
wanted them. It's like, what the hell are these cars?
So when we
At
come
the time.
s so when we come to the,
Yeah.
Return of the Man from Uncle, there is a character known as JB, obviously a stand-in for James Bond, but you can't call him James Bond. It was played by George Lazenby. Describe what the original plan was in the script, and you ended up loaning the production your DB5, but,
Yeah.
describe
Yeah.
that if you
Well, in
could.
the Yeah, in the script, it just says JB, joins the chase with Napoleon Solo, and he's driving a red Mustang. They were going to try and find a Mach 1 red Mustang, a la Tiffany Case's car, as if he was borrowing Tiffany Case's car while he was in Vegas. And I said, "Well, I I happen to have a DB5, a silver DB5, if you want Bond to drive an Aston Martin." And they said, so Michael said, that Michael, the producer, said, "Oh, that would be much more cooler to have him with the Aston Martin DB5." So I drove the car over to CBS and had Michael take a look at it, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm sold. We'll have JB, drive this." And so we sent the car out to Vegas, and the rest is history. It was just like I just turned the car over to the second unit guys, and they had George, drive the car. I also, oh yeah, I did create a armrest control center panel that I built for the car, so that it would have switches to activate the gadgets and stuff. I didn't follow the Goldfinger car. I just made up something that was kind of brand new, as far as the controls go. And George always ragged on me. The car was an automatic, so it was a beggars can't be choosers kind of thing. So when I bought the car, I knew it was on automatic, and I've never been fond of automatics, but it was okay. George always ragged on me about the fact that the car was an automatic and didn't have the get up and go that it should have. But I had known George previously because I had helped Steve Rubin with his Encyclopedia of James Bond book. I had done some interviews for Steve, and one of them was I had interviewed George Lazenby. So I knew George previously anyway from interviewing him, and I had gone to England to interview Derek Meddings while doing his miniature work on Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. So I knew Derek Meddings at the time as well, and spent time at Eon over at Pinewood. Um, and Also, I was also on the set of All of You to a Kill, um, at the time that I was over at Pinewood and stuff, and they gave me tours of the Bond museum that they had up in the soundstage of all the gadgets and stuff. We'll go out and have a pint or two with the staff of Eon while I was over there. So yeah, I'm a Bond fan, dyed in the wool, as it were. But getting back to George, he's I've always liked George because he's just he tells you what he tells you what he feels, and he doesn't hold back, and he's just just an honest, straightforward guy, which gets him into which gets him into trouble occasionally. But that's George, and I feel fortunate that I've actually been able to meet all the actors who have ever played James Bond, except for Barry Nelson. Otherwise, I've had a chance to meet them either socially or professionally, here and there.
Well,
So
that's interesting. Hadn't heard that before. Real quick, this is something I've obsessed about, but
yeah,
I'll just get your opinion about. So in the fall of 1982, you had the first three Bond film actors all working on a project at the
yeah,
same time. And the one who had the shortest work schedule was Lazenby on The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. And his work schedule, if I remember correctly, was December 2nd and 3rd, 1982. My good friends at MI6HQ website tell me that Roger Moore worked on those same days on Octopussy. What I have never been able to confirm, I suspect it's true, is that Connery probably worked on those same days on Never Say Never Again, but I can't. I beat my head
well,
against the wall.
all you'd need is some call sheets.
Um, I got introduced to a guy who had call sheets, but he didn't have them for those days on Never Say Never Again.
No.
Yeah, it was like, oh, like
Well,
I gave up at that point. You know, a- again, it's probably true because those days were Thursday and Friday of a work week.
yeah, yeah,
Connery's in most of the scenes of Never Say Never Again. He probably worked on those days, but I can't confirm
yeah,
them, and no
yeah.
one no
Well,
one's come forward to to help me out.
wow.
So
Wow, yeah. I think it's very probable. I mean, I thought, it's like when I was out there in Vegas working with, yeah, just so people know, the reason why I was working on the film is that Michael Sloan hired me as the technical advisor on the film, as the Man from Uncle fan who would be there on set every day to make sure that they didn't make any, so that there was somebody to fill in the blanks about what the original show would have done. And of course, there were some decisions that were made that were wholly just, well, we want to do something new and different. I was like, okay, but they're, and so in any case, I was the advisor out there, um, and that's
well,
why I was integrated into the project, and offered the car and everything, and other stuff that I had, so that it would be available to the production. But I was very aware when George was working with the Aston that Sean and Roger were probably working at the same time, because I knew that the Octopussy and Never Say Never were in production at the same time. It was just weird. It was just weird. Like, all three Bonds are like all working. This is weird.
what? We've gone on for a while, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to have you put your Bond fan hat on for a
Yeah.
couple quick questions.
Yeah.
What is your view as the state of the Bond film franchise? Um, it's
Um, well, what you mean from a Bond stand? You
just
mean like
a
right
fan
now, what's going
standpoint,
on?
yeah,
A fan
because
standpoint is what's going on right now?
because
Yeah. My
nothing.
basic feeling my basic feeling is they'll do a new Bond when all the stars align. And I don't have any problem with that, because it may take them a while to figure out, what Bond should be, what they're going to do as far as their communication with Amazon, everybody thinks that, I mean, the press, the press stuff at the moment has, Barbara Broccoli and and Amazon at odds at the moment, but it can't, it's like, but I take that with a grain of salt due to the fact that if they were at such odds, they wouldn't be in business making chitty chitty bang bang at the moment. There's something, they've just got to, obviously they're trying to come to terms with, how Amazon is going to handle the property and how everybody's, what everybody's going to agree to, and it's just going to take a little while. My I am from my own standpoint, I on one side, I don't like the fact that we're waiting so long for a new Bond film. Um, because I just enjoy having Bond films come out on a regular basis. But they have a tough road ahead of them with the Amazon deal and how Amazon operates and exactly what to do with the character of Bond to to draw an audience these days. Personally, I think that they should just do a classic Bond film, and the audience that shows up and appreciates what the James Bond character is all about. um, I don't have any problem with the fact that the Daniel Craig films are wrapped up. That those films, though there are references to the other series, they did those films as a separate entity that have some callbacks to the other series, but Daniel Craig's tenure is like a standalone Bond adventure. That it doesn't tie into the other Bonds that came before. It's a hard reboot, and that was his adventure. That was his interpretation of Bond. And having talked to Daniel Craig about it, Daniel is very specific about, yeah, that was a different storyline and a different, a different group of adventures, and it's its own standalone presentation, which is why he demanded that he get killed off at the end, because that was that those were his James Bond adventures, and that was it. A solid beginning with him getting his double O, and a solid ending with him with his character getting killed, so that Eon had a clean slate to go do a new James Bond, a new kind of James Bond adventure. And the reason why I'm fine with that is that I liked Daniel Craig as James Bond. I liked Casino Royale, but I thought that Eon completely lost their way in trying to maintain a connection throughout all the films and didn't serve him well with the James Bond universe that they created for Craig's universe. And I'm just going to sum it up with, they completely lost me with the Foster brothers, and I was like, I'm done. This is like so off the rails. And the way they're treating Spectre and the way they're treating Blofeld and trying to retrofit everything back into all the other characters was just not the way to, they lost me, they definitely lost me as a Bond fan. And I was just like, okay, what's the next one going to be? All right, well, I'll go see it. All right, all right. So personally, I'm glad that they have a clean slate, that perhaps they'll come up with come up with something that's a little bit more, a little bit more Bondian for my tastes. That's all.
I'll apologize to the audience. I laughed out loud at one of Bob's comments, mostly because I feel the same way about the Foster brother thing. Anyway, Bob, I want to thank you for making time out of your schedule. We've had some difficulties getting together, but that's fine. That's fine. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did. Um, and
Oh yeah,
again,
no,
you
I had a good time,
you come
and I
up.
have lots. It's one of those things where I've got lots more stories, and I'm just trying to figure out which ones to, which ones to tell. And that's why I just kind of threw
Yeah,
in bits and
no.
pieces here and there. And by the way, there's other stuff, but in any case, no, I had a good time, Bill, and I hope everybody else did. I hope everybody else did too. And and as I'm talking to you guys, I feel like I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version of all this stuff. There's actually a lot more stuff that wraps around all this information.
Well, maybe we can get together some other time.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. To our listeners, thank you for listening. This has been uh, another 2025 episode of the 007 Files. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. Take care.